I want to talk about this theme that already Philip's referred to, living for God and for other people, a countercultural way of understanding life. Let's recap on what we've been talking about in other occasions in this series. We've talked about what is my life's purpose? What are the things that are really important for me in life? And what on earth am I here for? Those questions, when we scratch at them, begin to raise issues for us in a very profound way. To think about the different purposes people have got in life. To achieve as much as I can in life. To be able to be at the top of the pile, not the bottom. That's how some people see life. To earn as much money, to gather as many toys and things together, to be able to say that I've succeeded at life. That is one of the things that people may live by. To strongly compete with other people. These are some of the things that people consider to be important. But you know, the way of Jesus, when it's lived authentically, always has about it a countercultural element that challenges the givens that people seem to accept as the priorities for their lives, offering alternatives, ways that we might see life in a deeper and more profound way. The world is constantly changing. 3 weeks, what 3 weeks have we lived through in Australia? I watched an interview that David Spears had with John Howard. He actually was promoting a book on things that he said and done. And actually he was in the right place at the right time, of course, because what had happened in the days previous to that is so many things on a political stage had changed. But one of the questions that was asked of him, it's not party politics, don't worry. One of the things that was asked of him was, what's the difference between things then and now? And he went on to say, quite rightly, there was no such thing as Twitter. Facebook had hardly been thought about when he was doing his politics. I tell you, he was relieved. You could see it in his face. What a world we now live in, where speed, the rapidity of change of ideas move around the world so very, very fast. Things cannot happen before the next person, thousands of miles away, knows all about it. Things that have changed. With regard to the human environment. Whatever we might say, and you think about the last few weeks again, we've talked in ways that are quite right about renewable energy. We've talked about conserving the planet. All things that we now talk about as common language. And whatever we might think, we are now more concerned, most of us, about the world in which we live and are set. The world is constantly changing. Sensible people talk about a multicultural society. A society where it's normative to accept that we don't divide this world. We don't think of this world in terms of the color of people's skin. We don't think of this world being divided up particularly along those kind of distinctions. But we know from the very earliest days, when the Christian gospel was first preached, turn to Acts 17 when you've got the chance to see Paul preaching at Athens, the Areopagus. No big crowd there. There weren't thousands of people there. And you're very conscious that maybe Athens and places like it in the days of the New Testament were places where people of different ideas and perceptions of life gathered together. You know, if we're going to learn what it means to live for God and for other people, we've got to live in this real world as it is and recognize that there is a stark difference between Christians and those around us. We shouldn't underestimate the complexity of the issues that face us today. It makes us more aware than ever of the difference between those people who embrace discipleship and Christian living and the kind of world in which we find ourselves living day by day. If you're thinking about what it means to be a Christian, and I hope if you have not yet made a decision to follow Christ, that you are thinking about that deeply and seriously in your life. You can't simply decide that you're going to be a Christian, and all that's going to happen is you're just now going to be a Christian in the same old world. When a woman, a man, a young person, or a child decides to follow Jesus, the world changes. Well, there's still 24 hours in each of those days, but the world changes. It makes a difference the way we live, whether it's at school, whether it's at college, whether it's on a campus or a workplace, whether it's at home, wherever we find ourselves, our lives are now different because of Christ. Christians are called to have a mind renewed. We are told that we have the mind of Christ, that we recognize this world, despite all its human failure, is a place where we know that we must make a difference. We are difference, and we must make a difference in that world if we are to truly live as Christian people. You see, the distinction puts responsibility on our shoulders. When I think of those Ghanaian Methodists that wrote that lovely, it's not a new hymn, of course, the hymn and song you sang earlier, Philip, that talks about the reality of Jesus and what it means to follow him and be changed. We know that all through history, people have had to stand up for what is right. They've had to declare what their discipleship means. And it's costly. It's costly to follow Jesus Christ, a pattern by which we can measure life, a purpose that can ignite our witness, and a preference that makes changes to the way we live. Jesus calls us to exert an influence upon the world. One of the great women professors at Cambridge University once gave this advice to her students, and I read these words: follow your interests. Get the best available education and training. Set your sights high. Be persistent. Be flexible. Keep your options open. Accept help when offered. And be prepared to help others. You know, when I read that, I think all those things, till you get nearly to the very end, we're all putting our hands up for. Be prepared to help, to assist, to live, to love, to care, to walk beside others, whatever that means. For discipleship puts a responsibility upon our lives. This kind of practical living is not just a collection of decent actions that we can affirm together, but it is part and parcel of our discipleship. In fact, if we don't really understand that one, then I think the most satisfying thing in life is to be able to somehow give something of yourself to others. It's the greatest thing in life, to know not only can you live for yourself, but you can do things by sharing and giving and living and being alongside people, make a difference to other people. That is one of the greatest discoveries of life. We are salt. Salt which brings flavor. Jesus uses these two metaphors as I close. Salt and light. It's very interesting that Jesus doesn't say we must become like these things. He says you are salt. You are light. Not if you'd like to be, you can be salt. You can be light. If you are a follower of Jesus, these things speak of what we are in the world in which we live. Luke also uses the idea of salt, you know, often not talked about in terms of his call to discipleship. And Paul, when he was writing to the Colossian Christians, talked about having a saltiness about our lives. Now, children copy adults so often that as parents and as grandparents, I've had to cheat about salt. What I mean by that is that we have had on the table an empty salt pot. That little children they've seen adults putting their salt on their food. And so they've said, I want some salt. And so we pass them the empty salt pot. They say, not too much, just a little. And of course they do. And they think that, and those of you that have too much salt, I hope you're listening. And they do. And they share that. But you see, the message of salt is the influence, the flavor, the addition that it brings to life. Does your life make a difference in the office? Does your life make a difference at school? Does your life make a difference in the classroom when you're teaching? Does it make a difference when you're leading? Wherever you are, making that difference. But we're more than salt, we're light. Light which points the way. Jesus went on later in his ministry, recorded for us in John's Gospel, when he said, I am the light of the world. You see, that was so important. And as Christian people, we kind of say to ourselves, we like that. It's one of the great I am sayings of Jesus. But he didn't just say, I am the light of the world. He said, you are the light of the world. So the light of God shines from our lives too. I suppose it says many things. We're not to conceal our witness. We're not to understand the insignificance of this because it's critical to the whole of life. We're like a city set on a hill. We heard in the witness that we heard earlier in the service that it affects the way that we live our lives day by day. There's an old humorous saying that goes a little like this. There was an old sailor my grandfather knew who had so many things that he wanted to do that just when he thought it was time to begin, he couldn't because of the state he was in. Sometimes we are so full of things that we lose our way. Fundamentally lose our way. You and I are called to be light. Amidst all kinds of responsibilities, I talked about those priorities that might be true in life, those things that we might think are important, gaining things, getting things. But you know, it's also true not only in terms of what life is for us, but in terms of our responsibilities. We have so many things that we need to do. One of the great demands of the Christian community today is that we are speaking to a generation of people that are so busy. The gospel has to find a way of addressing, through you and I, the busyness of life. And therefore, not only talking about the busyness, all the stuff that we use language like priorities. I recall a true story of some lines that were discovered after the Second World War in Germany. They were scratched on a bomb-blasted air raid shelter in Germany. I believe in the light, even when the sun doesn't shine. I believe in love, even when it isn't given. I believe in God, even when his voice is silent. We're called to recognize that Jesus Christ is looking for a countercultural people who are prepared to stand up in our world and inevitably be different, especially if it runs against all the trends, to stand for Christ, whatever the cost. And there is a sense in which only you can answer that, what that cost means for you and how it can change the way that we live. We have talked many, many times, and nobody knows it more than I, having come to share, that this is a beautiful country. We live in a place that has so many opportunities, but we also live in a place for which the light of Christ needs to shine in the hearts of millions of people who not only have they rejected him, but many have never even heard of him. And the only way that is going to happen is not by clever preaching, not by clever youth groups, not by fun music, ultimately by countercultural lives that are prepared to stand up for Christ. There have been a number of things just recently that I've been conscious in my discipleship of standing for. And I realized that it feels like all the water is flowing the other way. And that sometimes what we stand for, it's so hard to stand by it. But I offer to you, that has to be our option if we are to make a difference.